Welcome back. As to Watching the World today, the United Nations Security Council has voted to support a U.S. resolution backing a ceasefire plan for the war in Gaza. All but one of the 15 Security Council members voted in favor of the U.S. drafted resolution, while Russia abstained. The proposal sets out conditions for full and complete ceasefire, the release of Hamas-held hostages, the return of dead hostages' remains, and the exchange of Palestinian prisoners. Speaking at the Security Council, Israel vowed to persist with its military operations in Gaza, emphasizing it will not engage in what it calls meaningless negotiations with Hamas. Hamas, on the other hand, issued a statement this morning welcoming the Security Council resolution.
Colleagues, the results of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 votes against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2735.
Colleagues, today this Council sent a clear message to Hamas. Accept the ceasefire deal on the table. Israel has already agreed to this deal, and the fighting could stop today if Hamas would do the same. I repeat, the fighting could stop today. This Council and countries across the region and the world have endorsed this agreement. Hamas can now see that the international community is united behind a deal that will save lives and help Palestinian civilians in Gaza start to rebuild and heal. United behind a deal that will reunite hostages with their families after 8 months in captivity. Today, we also reaffirmed our commitment to the vision of 2 states, where Israelis and Palestinians live side by side in peace, within secure and recognized borders, consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions, and where a revitalized and reformed Palestinian Authority leads a unified West Bank and Gaza.
On the very first days following Hamas's invasion and brutal massacre on October 7th, Israel's goals have been very clear: to bring all our hostages back home and to dismantle Hamas's capabilities. Israel is committed to these goals: to free all the hostages, to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities, and to ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel in the future. And as we have echoed numerous times in this very chamber, once these goals are met, the war will end. If Hamas were to release the hostages and turn themselves in, not one more shot needs to be fired. Israel will not let Hamas rearm or regroup so that Gaza can pose a threat to Israel. This is the unwavering goal that we are determined to achieve. This also means that Israel will not engage in meaningless and endless negotiations which can be exploited by Hamas as a means to stall for time.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, during his Mid-East tour, says Hamas will be to blame if a ceasefire plan backed by Washington and the UN does not progress. Mr. Blinken, who visited the Middle East on Monday, has reiterated his call for Hamas to accept the 3-phase proposal outlined by President Joe Biden. Mr. Biden says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had reaffirmed his commitment to the proposal when they held talks in Jerusalem. He added that if the proposal did not proceed, then it was on Hamas. Mr. Netanyahu has not publicly endorsed what Mr. Biden outlined, nor said whether it matches an Israeli proposal on which Mr. Biden's statement was based. The VOA's correspondent in the United Nations, Margaret Bashir, joins us now. Margaret, it's great to see you. This is one of those rare times that the UN agrees with a U.S. proposal. Could this be because the UN has for so long called for an Israeli ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, I think you have to separate the Security Council from the UN in general. One is the member states and one is Antonio Guterres, so to speak. In the Security Council, yes, we've seen months of division over Gaza, It's been a problem to get any kind of agreement on important issues since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. That took some sort of simmering tensions and really exploded them out into the mainstream. So it's really mucked up the wheels in the Security Council on a lot of important matters, and Gaza has certainly been one of them. In March, the Security Council finally was able to coalesce around their own ceasefire call. That was for Ramadan, for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, and they called for it. Russia didn't block it. The United States didn't block it. But the Israelis and Hamas did not implement it. So let's see what happens now with this proposal. Russia did express some hesitation at the vote. They abstained. They said that they didn't really know enough about this ceasefire proposal. They only had very vague outlines. They didn't think the council should agree to something that they hadn't read the entire document. And so we'll see. But the Arab countries were behind it. So everybody else got behind it. And that's what's important, I think.
Yes, but Hamas quickly agreed to this deal. But has the UN explored, some of the concerns raised by Israel? The Israeli representative there to the UN Security Council said that Israel will not engage, of course, in meaningless conversations, but also says that Israel is committed to Hamas not being a threat to Israel in the near future. Those operations against Hamas will continue despite the resolution. What can the U.S., to beg your pardon, the Israeli representative to the UN did highlight, some of the concerns that the Israeli government has against Hamas, which is that a ceasefire could be an opportunity for Hamas to, replenish weapons that it has used and then, to regroup and re-strategize against Israel. Is the UN considering some of these concerns by the Israeli government?
Well, sure. I mean, that's certainly been Israel's position since October 7th. And the UN Security Council really cannot do too much about it. It's up to the states that have influence on the parties to guarantee the implementation of this proposal. That would be the United States working with Israel and Qatar working with Hamas. Hamas has its political office in Doha, so they have relations. They have to be the main guarantors here. They have to push the parties. And the bottom line really is, does Israel want their hostages that are alive to come home? Does Hamas want the suffering of the Palestinian civilians to stop? And if they do, then they will implement it.
Yes, and I'm sure the Israeli government also highlighted as well, it is committed to bringing those hostages back home, although, a lot of lives have been lost trying to retrieve those hostages, from captivity. Israeli authorities also say that the operation against Hamas will continue despite this resolution. So what can the UN do about Israel's obstinance?
Well, they haven't had much success with it in the past. There are already 3, I think, or 4 now resolutions on the Gaza war. Neither Israel nor Hamas has implemented them. They have a resolution about Israeli settlements that's been on the books for almost a decade now. We see settlement activity is growing. So there is little that the Security Council can do because the United States would probably block any kind of meaningful sanctions against Israel. So it's, again, comes down to the countries with influence to talk to their partners and to make it happen.
Will the UN also consider U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's efforts in the Middle East right now? He's currently trying to negotiate the ceasefire, making sure that all sides are on the table, on the same page, with the expectations of the ceasefire. And might I add, another reason why they could be pushing for this is because there is another Muslim holiday coming up next week, with the moon having been sighted in Saudi Arabia. So is the UN also considering his efforts? Because Israel continues to defy the suggestions of the ceasefire, even though Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had said previously that he agreed, with the U.S. plan, but now he says, unless it also addresses Israeli concerns, we're not on the table with this.
I think part of the problem over the past week or so since this proposal has been out there in the public is that the rhetoric coming out of Israel hasn't really been matching the White House remarks. The White House has been saying this is Israel's proposal, but yet Israel isn't really saying it's their proposal. It's not clear in this building whether they would sign up to it. Yesterday, the Israeli ambassador was on CNN after the vote, and he said, asked if they would implement it. He talked about interpretations of the three phases in the ceasefire proposal. So I think Israel is sort of leaving itself some wiggle room, but at the end of the day, they've signed up to it. It's supposed to be their proposal, and so we're just going to have to wait and see if they can get this over the finish line. Blinken is in the region for the 8th time in as many months. He said that Netanyahu reaffirmed his commitment to this deal when he met with him on Monday. So that's a good sign. We've heard positive signals from Hamas about yesterday's resolution. They welcomed it. It has a lot of the things, this deal has a lot of the things that they've been asking for. So if you're not going to stop the war now, when are you going to stop it? This is the best option, the best opportunity, as Ambassador Thomas Greenfield was saying in that clip. This is the best opportunity to do it.
Murky waters ahead. Margaret Bashir, thank you for helping us navigate.
Thanks for having me.